Order. Order.
The draft grants to the Churches Conservation Trust Order 2025.
I call the Minister to move the motion.
Mr. Stewart, what an utter delight it is to sit under your chairmanship. This is the first time I've ever done so, and so it's a delight to see you in your place. I beg to move that the committee has considered the draft grants to the Churches Conservation Trust Order 2025. I don't suppose you could find a more esoteric or indeed recherché piece of legislation than this evening, but I hope everybody will be endorsing the measure before us. I'm pleased to be speaking to this order, which was laid before the House in draft on the 28th of January. It's required under law so that the government may continue to provide funding for the Churches Conservation Trust, known as the CCT, not by anybody other than by people who write notes for ministers. The CCT takes into its care over 350 of the most impressive examples of our churches that are no longer required for regular worship. All of these churches are listed, mostly at Grade 1 and Star 2, and some are scheduled ancient monuments. The Trust keeps these buildings open to the public and does not charge an entry fee, instead believing that historic buildings are buildings that belong to everyone in the community. More importantly, CCT works to bring these buildings back to life. Its regeneration team delivers major new use projects for historic places of worship, working with local people to deliver award-winning projects such as 1719 in the former Holy Trinity in Sunderland. In addition to restoring the buildings in its own care, the Trust is also taking the exciting opportunity to move its own headquarters into a new space in Northampton. This is the derelict Grade 2 listed Old Black Lion pub, which will be brought back to life as a pub through an innovative regeneration project which will support the management and maintenance of St Peter's Church next door, whilst also becoming home to the Trust's national team. The Trust is supported through funding both from the Government, which is what we're approving today, and the Church of England. It has also sought to diversify its income streams in order to further support its activity at a time of pressure on public funding, including through donations, legacies and grant-giving foundations. To close, Mr Stewart, I hope that the committee shares my enthusiasm for the important work of the Trust and the key role it plays in preserving and promoting a vital aspect of our nation's heritage, and that it will consent to approve the grants to the Churches Conservation Trust Order 2025, which will provide funding of over £3 million to the Trust for 2025-26. I commend the draft order to the committee.
Yeah. The question is that the committee has considered the draft grants to the Churches Conservation Trust Order 2025. It's a key party.
Thank you, Mr Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I thank the Minister for introducing these regulations. His Majesty's official opposition warmly welcome the government's support for the Churches Conservation Trust. I suspect I may end up repeating some of what the Minister said, but His Majesty's opposition take this very seriously. The Churches Conservation Trust, before His Majesty's take this very seriously. The Churches Conservation Trust performs a crucial role in protecting churches at risk. The Trust funds repairs and maintenance on over 350 churches that it has in its portfolio, and it attracts over 2 million visitors per year. And all of the churches the Trust has are either listed, either being Grade 1 or Grade 2, and some, as the Minister said, are scheduled ancient monuments. However, it is important to highlight, as the Minister did, that the Trust work extends far beyond repairing churches. For example, the Churches Conservation Trust Regeneration Team works with community groups, charities, social enterprises, businesses, entrepreneurs and public bodies to find new uses for closed places of worship and other heritage sites. This helps to revitalise and rejuvenate the space for the benefit of local communities. Their core mission is to ensure the buildings are preserved and remain at the heart of local communities. A key principle is that the regeneration team that they try to instill is that sustainable stewardship, which includes ensuring that problems such as decay or irrelevance are identified early to prevent them from becoming overwhelming. So without the funding provided to the Churches Conservation Trust, the churches that they care for now may have only been listed in the history books, and there is no doubt the communities would have been all the poorer for it. So I welcome the funding. And thanks to the fantastic work of the Trust, the buildings are tourist attractions for bringing visitors to UK cities, towns and villages. They're spaces for education and development. They're meeting spots for local residents, and as they're all still consecrated, they remain open for worship. Looking forward, I hope the government recognises the place of churches in modern society and the wider benefits that they bring in terms of education, tackling loneliness, bringing communities together and attracting visitors. Sadly, as many members will be aware, Historic England's Heritage at Risk Register found that there are still 969 places of worship that are at risk in the 2024 register. This is a significant change from 2023 because while 23 were removed, 55 were added, marking an increase of 26 over the total of the 2023 register. This is cathedrals, parish churches, chapels and meeting houses, making up 959 of those 969 places of worship on the register, with the others belonging to other faiths. Churches are closing at an alarming rate, and the Chancellor's budget has unfortunately placed an additional financial burden on every aspect of society and culture, including churches. Many churches have staff who are part-time or on lower wages within the congregations, and concerns have been raised about the impact of the increase in national insurance and the decrease in the thresholds and the impact that they will have on the churches, particularly as parish administrators work only a few days a week and they're worried about how that may be affected. And we are clear, churches which are not under the strong stewardship and care of the Churches Conservation Trust must not be left to decay and neglect. The government's decision to continue the listed places of worship grant scheme was welcome, and I thank the Minister for what he did on that. But there was a cut in funding, and the decision to only commit to one more calendar year leaves churches in a worried period of uncertainty. So can the Minister say whether the impact of the new cap on the scheme has been taken into account when bringing these regulations forward? Will he also consider, when it comes to the listed places of worship grant scheme, will he work with me and will he consider a more permanent grant scheme, not a rebate, a grant scheme or a relief scheme? And I'm more than happy to work with him on that from this side of the House. In addition, to add to the uncertainty, the government is yet to publish its guidance on how those changes to the scheme will actually work. For example, when the Shadow Minister in the other place asked the Minister there if the new annual limit of £25,000 per institution on claims from the listed place of worship grant scheme will apply to works begun before that date. And the Minister was only able to say, we will provide updated information on scheme applications and eligibility in due course before April. So I asked the Minister if he's able to clarify that today. Many people will be looking for that answer because they have already working on behind the scene to fund restoration projects, and they deserve a bit more clarity and certainty from the government. And I hope that clarification will be forthcoming. But as I said at the start, Mr. Chairman, we welcome this regulation, but I do hope the government takes on board the points that I made today.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stewart. If I just run through the various points that the Honourable Member made, including the ones which were not strictly speaking anything to do with the measure that is before us, but nonetheless, I'm happy to try it and accommodate him. First of all, he obviously knows that this is solely about redundant churches. And it's simply it will be impossible for the Trust to take on all the new redundant churches every year. It's only 2 or 3 or so that are able to be taken on by the Trust. We don't want to overload it and make it impossible for the Trust to be able to do the work that it does. It is a sad fact that we have a vast number of churches which are now passing into redundancy. They don't have a congregation. They certainly don't have a congregation that is financially able to maintain them. There were churches built in areas and in eras when more people went to church, or they hoped that more people would go to church than ever actually did. And some of these are very difficult to maintain. So he's right that the Heritage at Risk Register is problematic. This isn't the only place that money comes from. For the Church of England itself provides roughly 34% of the funding for the Trust. And the Heritage Lottery has committed, I think, something like £110 million over the next few years towards listed places of worship as well. So there are other means of trying to maintain listed places of worship which are also heritage sites which are at risk. He asked specifically about the listed places of worship scheme, which, as I say, Mr. Stewart, has nothing to do with what we're considering today, but nonetheless. First of all, he asked about why is it just 1 year at a time? Well, to be honest, it's always been 1 year at a time. And when he was a minister, it was exactly the same under his government for year after year after year. And that's why we've only been able to make a commitment for this next year. He could have asked about why is this only a 1 year commitment that we're making, because in previous years governments have been able to make 3-year commitments in relation to this order, and the reason is simply because we want to fit in with the spending review process. The next spending review will cover, as he knows, the next 3 years, and so we would hope that the next time we bring forward an order we'd be able to match that 3-year spending review process. I can't make a guarantee that that's what we would do for the listed places of worship scheme, but the whole idea behind trying to go back to 3-year spending review processes is that that gives much more security for people making longer term decisions, whether that's a local authority or it's a piece of heritage at risk, whether that's ecclesiastical or cultural or whatever it may be. He asked about the cap on the scheme, the £25,000 cap. So before we introduced the cap on the scheme, which leads to an overall cap of some £23 million for the whole scheme, the listed places of worship scheme for the year, we assessed what previous bids had led to, and 94% of bids were for less than £25,000. So we would estimate that 94% of bids will be accounted for. And obviously, if there are multiple schemes engaged, then people can make multiple claims. Any claims that are received up until the end of this financial year, of course, are not subject to that cap. He asked about the advice. I'm afraid I'm not able to provide any further advice today, but we will certainly be wanting to do that as soon as we possibly can so that people can make secure decisions before the 1st of April. He will know, I'm sure, that virtually every church, I think, in the land that has already made long commitments to rebuilding work and restoration work into the future has already written into the department. So I think we're fairly well aware of the issues that many churches are facing. But as I say, Mr. Stewart, without this measure, we wouldn't be able to give the 3 million and a bit that we will be giving in the year 2025-2026 to the Trust, and so I very much hope that the committee will approve the measure.
The question is that the committee has considered the draft grants to the Churches Conservation Trust Order 2025. As many are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. For the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Notwithstanding Mr. MacDonald, the ayes have it.